I think this can create tremendous economic value if you do it that way. If you go first with the mission and you worry about the economics as a supportive factor of that mission, I think you can create tremendous economic value. There's 2.5 billion Christians in the world. That's a really big subscriber business if you get a small portion of them to subscribe.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Something New, the podcast where we talk about interesting things going on in tech for people building something new. Or at least people aspiring to build something new. I'm Leeor.
And I'm Steph.
Think of us as a bit of a technical how I built this, but maybe a little bit less Guy Raz and a little bit more Guy Riz.
This is the peak, and then we're going downhill from here.
I'm using my podcast voice. Yeah, for today on Something New, excited to talk about winning motions.
Yeah, what is a winning motion?
Yeah, for sure. I've been thinking a lot about a part of the fundraise and startup process that I feel like is not talked about as much, and that's when the founder has control. Usually the founder might, have multiple term sheets or even sign with the lead. And I'm always fascinated from both sides of the equation. One, on the VC's front, like how do they think about going and winning the investment, winning the deal, and winning out their allocation as well, depending on the situation. And then from the founder's perspective, have kind of been always intrigued and continue to be intrigued about how they think about diligencing funds from their end and like what works, what doesn't. And so just figure, given that, I've been involved in plenty of competitive processes before or processes that got competitive, I figured might be a fun topic to talk about.
Yeah. What are some things that you've done? I'm curious, especially as like a newer firm establishing yourselves still. How have you guys handled that?
Totally. I have this one specific strategy. It sounds pretty simple, but I've noticed that people don't always do it. And I call it like founder armada. And
interesting.
Yeah. So basically, I have like some founders that I'm particularly close with who honestly, deserve so much in this world. And thank you so much for the ones who allow me to do this, who I, might type like their little bio of a message and then like say like, dear so-and-so, either through text or through email. And then they'll fill it in with however they want to talk about me and us, depending on the situation. If it's someone that I worked with in my previous gig or someone that we've worked with so far in like the early stages of our fund. And so we, might have 5 or 6 founders send, messages along these lines. Sometimes, hopefully we don't want to be annoying, but at the same time, like these are other founders we work with who can speak to us. And then in some cases, those founders want to talk to those founders live. So that happens as well. And so, it's a fairly simple tactic, but, I think like already just doing that alone probably gets us in the top 10% of people, running, kind of win motion tactics. And so I've just found it to be effective.
So it's funny, like I think that's like there's 2 schools of thought. Like I think some people go like all in and all in either like with lavishness or thoughtfulness. And then there's other people who are really kind of lax, which I think is kind of interesting. But I do think it's underrated of like, I don't think you have to have, or maybe this is just me. I feel like lavishness is not necessary. I think thoughtfulness would actually be more impactful on the average founder than like a fancy dinner or a private jet flight. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I hope so, because I can't be slinging around as many private jet flights as other folks, and so I don't have that in my bag. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I think I generally agree with that, and also like want to believe that. But I also can imagine, like, in an example with like Mark and Ben, like realistically, and this is no slight at them or anything. It's just like this is just how it works. Like if you're a seed investment, like they're going to come in and kind of convince you. And then until probably like a later stage, you're never going to talk to them again. And so there's a question to me as to like, or like a private jet flight or something that's like a little bit more fleeting and that just helps you win in the moment. And so I just wonder, like obviously like with Andreessen's case, they have like all sorts of other reasons as to why they can and do win. But I always wonder about like, what are the things that actually matter? Being open to the fact that like some of these bells and whistles, like, I've seemingly have worked in some cases. And so, but you never know like what's kind of going on in the individual's head.
Yeah, well, I think I actually agree with you. What I'm saying is, I feel like that stuff is cool. Would it actually move the needle for most folks? And like, fully transparently, I've never been brought on a private jet by a VC, so maybe I feel totally differently. Not yet. Maybe I feel totally differently if someone did that for me. But I actually think weirdly, kind of to your point, when people are choosing folks to work with, I mean, every founder has different values and things. I think for me, having seen both sides of the table, something that was really important to me is like working with folks who are genuinely founder friendly. And I would couple that with like high integrity as well. Like something I admired about NEA is that they were constantly talking about internally how they've been around for 40 years. They want to be around for 100, and they're not going to sacrifice that desire for like a short-term gain by screwing over a founder in the near term or acting in a way that's low integrity. And so that was always really important to me. So like for me, when I was going to my fundraise, I had a pretty clear idea of like the firms I wanted to work with and the partners I wanted to work with versus not, just because reputationally, and I think that also was unique to us, having been in the VCC before and having peers and other folks that can back channel who've worked at those firms, et cetera, who give you a good idea of that. So to me, that was kind of like the number one thing. And I think short of actually like being in the industry and knowing that for yourself, I feel like that's the next strongest signal you can get is seeing someone's thoughtfulness around you in particular and your company versus like a generic private jet flight or like fancy dinner, in my opinion, which is why I feel like it's underrated. Like I remember Rajiv, who we had interviewed a few episodes ago, was talking about, his company Tandem was raising an Andreessen instead of like a tandem bike. Kind of cute, punny, all that kind of stuff. And I'm sure they did a lot of other things in that process. But I do think something catered specifically to that founder or something that they've told you or got to know or that you've gotten to know through the process, at least for me, would do so much more than, an expensive, flashy thing that any founder that they're trying to win gets,
Yeah, no, I hear you. I mean, I think it's, and then on the references front, actually curious on that front, like, I mean, I think a whole other, I've seen some of our friends, like even not even just referencing VCs, but referencing startups, like one person in particular that I won't name, but like when this person was trying to figure out which company to join back in the day, like they like were going hard in the paint on references from investors, current investors, previous investors, employees, like market research, customers, and that was only to figure out like which company, which startup to join.
Wow.
Which is like pretty intense.
Impressive. Yeah.
And obviously that's on the far end of the spectrum. On a slightly less far end of the spectrum, maybe in a fundraise, you might try to find founders that both the VC has kind of given you as potential references, but also like referencing them with founders that that they invested that, that they aren't giving you as references to make sure that you're seeing like both like the good and the bad, I guess. Like curious, like as someone who's been on both sides of the table, if you were trying to like get to the core of someone, given that it might be a 10-year partnership, how would you structure that like learning process?
Yeah. So it's funny that you say that, because I feel like when you were talking about your strategy, I think that's awesome. And I think helpful for context, especially if you're building a new relationship with someone you didn't previously know. But I'll be super honest. I feel like I discount in general, like whether it's hiring or working with folks or whatever, I in general discount references that people give me. Like sometimes I don't even ask for them. Like thinking about my last fundraising process, I think there was only one firm, just because I really didn't know them at all. I was introduced through like a friend of a friend. I think they were relatively new. I asked them for references because there was literally just no other way to kind of even break it and figure out kind of a, another way to back channel them. But to be honest, of course, like you discount the folks that people are presenting you, right? That they're going to be like the best and brightest. I think for firms who've been around for a while, it's so much easier to back channel, right? The best people to ask definitely are former employees and old portfolio company founders that haven't particularly broken out. Like the common trope of,
I think that's key. The haven't broken out piece is key, because if they've broken out, then that firm is going to shower them with everything they've got.
100%. Yeah, exactly. And so I think those two things in general are the best way to back channel a firm and get honest opinions. And in my experience, I think founders too are very honest with each other. Like I was really impressed. Like I would cold DM people on Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever and I would get very, very, very blunt responses. And I think that is like a unique founder cultural thing that I have not experienced when I've been diligencing jobs as like a candidate, other things. So it's something that I'm really blessed for and definitely recommend to people who are, taking it seriously.
Yeah, no, I think your point on the like intro references versus back channel ones. I tell people like back channel us. That's also another thing. Is I'm like I mean,
mind games. Yeah,
exactly. Well, I mean, again, maybe mind games. I don't know. But I'm like, the only reticence I have in that is like I don't want to like have people getting pinged all the time that I've worked with that are like busy starting companies. So I always like think about that. But other than that, like I'm like yes, like. Back channel us. I don't care. Like, I'm not going to take it personally if you asked, someone that I've worked with or someone that we've invested in behind my back. Like, it's encouraged. Like, as long as like you realize that some of these people like, might be busy. Like, I think I seek that out like as a tool for us as well.
Yeah. So Alex is a classmate of ours, and he's spectacular. I think, and probably Leeor, we've talked about this in the past. So I feel like we agree that I feel like it was pretty obvious early on, like who the serious founders were. And Alex, I'd say definitely definitively was one of them. He was so intentional from the very beginning about wanting to start something. And, I tell the story on the podcast as well, but he would be like literally working on Hallow 24/7, including in class. Like you could just tell that this was his life's work. And something I always admired about him. So Hallow is a prayer meditation app. Needless to say, it has grown tremendously since we met Alex when he was first starting on it. Yeah. Some stats I found amazing. They have 600 million prayers that have been done, 1 billion minutes prayed on the app, #1 Catholic app in the world. And they most recently raised their $50 million Series C. Super impressive as well, given they're not anything related to AI. Right. And something that I love talking to Alex about was kind of the idea that religion in general was seen as kind of an uninvestable space. And needless to say, he's proved a lot of folks wrong. So I love this interview. I think he also does things a lot differently compared to the average founder. And so I'm really excited to share this interview with y'all. Alex, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, well, I'm super excited to have you, especially when I reached out to you. I remember the one main memory that I had of you was, I think you were in my section even, so this is from like the very first quarter, but I remember hearing that you were so dedicated to your company that you were literally like handwriting responses to emails in relation to Hallow, even like during classes where we weren't allowed laptops. And I was like, wow, that is so smart. Like I had my phone like under the desk, like, writing my emails on my phone, and I always got in trouble. And of course it wasn't very effective. But you did it right. I knew that you were very serious. And so anyway,
that's funny.
That was unsurprising.
My team did not really appreciate the little just pictures of my notebook just being sent to them with just paragraphs and paragraphs of writing also during class.
AI, where you can't just like upload that into something or...
Yeah, no, it was just, I mean, the first year, because they didn't let, laptops in almost any of the classes, it was pretty tough, actually, it was like a lot of work. I probably spent like 20, 25 hours a week on grad school stuff and then 80-ish on Hallow stuff. So it was pretty intense. The second year, I was pretty close to dropping out, but COVID hit and, allowed me to work in parallel to the little Zoom classes or whatever whenever I wanted. So it made it a lot easier to finish out the second year actually for me.
Actually, I'm curious. One thing that stands out about your founding journey too is I feel like you've done things in a very contrarian is maybe like a stronger word that I'm looking for, but you have done things like your own way, right? You're building in Chicago rather than in LA or SF, New York, or Miami. You're like building in a space, not only consumer, but I'd say like religion also in general. It's not necessarily like a hot VC space that everyone gravitates towards. You chose to get an MBA as well. I'm curious like how maybe the MBA added it into your founding journey. And then I'm curious about how you think about like the way that you build things in general versus kind of following the standard status quo advice.
Yeah, certainly the idea of a Christian or Catholic startup in Silicon Valley was not certainly not the norm. Yeah, there's a bunch of stories about pitching. That was always an interesting experience. But there's a much longer version of the story. But the Hallow story, the reason we started working on it was because it changed my own life. I had fallen away from my faith and came back to it through discovering contemplative and meditative prayer, and changed my life is a dramatic understatement. It changed everything. My faith went from something I wouldn't have identified with to the most important part of my life, more important than, which is crazy, but more important than my family or kids or work or career or any of that stuff. And, brought me just this like tremendous amount of joy and peace and strength, even in times that were really uncertain, quitting your job, doing crazy stuff, going through grad school, trying to build a startup, all that stuff, which startup life is incredibly stressful. For us, it was really all, and this might sound a little weird, but it was really all like just trying to do what God was asking us to do. And so we spent a lot of time in prayer. We spent a lot of time trying to just, what is God calling us to do with this thing? For me, it was, he had given me this incredible gift and I wanted to share it. I thought the model of a startup was a really great way to build this app. Because for us, Hallow isn't, it's not really doing anything. I don't know. It's not like we're trying to get to Mars, and if we don't get to Mars, then humanity doesn't get to Mars. It's not like we're a doctor where if, my doctor's not around, I'm going to be really upset. It's an app. It's a consumer app. If it's not around, I use it 3 times a day, every day. If it's not around tomorrow, I'll be fine. Just like I'll be fine if Spotify's not around, if Netflix isn't around. But what we do have is this unique opportunity to really reach out to people, especially people who have fallen away, especially people in really tough times, in really tough places in their life, and to offer them the love and the peace and the joy of faith. And, that for us, it takes building something really big that's really risky, that's most likely going to fail. And it just really well aligns with the startup world. And so we certainly didn't think that it would work. I mean, we built this at the beginning, I built it just for me. And then we had some friends and family use it and we were like, this is awesome. I think we had some crazy stories come through, just a couple dozen people. And we're like, I think God's doing something pretty cool with this. And so we might as well try to build it as a startup. I have no idea what retention rates are going to look like or unit economics, or if we're going to find a distribution channel or any of the stuff that's, fun and hard to figure out as a startup. But we were like, it'd be a fun way to spend, 6, 12 months trying to build something and learn. And, maybe we help a person or two and we get to be a part of their journey with God, which would be awesome. But then, each step of the way, it's kind of just been us trying to figure out where God wants us to go, whether that was, how we structured the company. It's a public benefit corporation, whether that was, how we raised, which we ended up going the, angel and VC route, kind of your traditional startup route, where we were located, which for us was, a lot of that was family. But Chicago felt like the right place for us to build this startup, who we partnered with, who ended up backing our seed rounds and A's and B's and C and all that stuff. So I think for us, it's always just been guided not really by, what the standard is in Silicon Valley, but by, what God is asking us to do.
If you go back to 2018 or late 2010s timeframe, there were other prayer apps, on the kind of app store, and there were other ways for folks like trying to engage with prayer and with religion. What do you think you saw at that point of time that gave you the confidence that actually another take was needed on the space?
Yeah. The funny thing is my answer to all these startup questions, which are great questions and really important questions, is, a chunk of it is we just got lucky or God helped us out or whatever it was. I didn't really think about it. I didn't analyze the market and be like, okay, where is this app weak? Where is this app strong? I think for us, the interesting thing, there were a handful of prayer apps, Bible apps, faith-based apps, meditation apps, secular meditation apps, spiritual meditation apps. For me, I didn't really, as myself trying to grow deeper in the spiritual life, I didn't really find anything that I loved. And so I wanted to build something for me. I didn't really care if a bunch of people used it. I thought it would be fun to see if some, maybe a couple dozen people or a couple hundred people would use it or something, but it certainly wasn't, what I wanted was something for me. And I think, what I really liked about how we built the app in the early days was it kind of showcased this diversity of spirituality within the Christian tradition. Not, some people focus on one thing. It's like you're just reading the Bible, or you're just reflecting on your day, or you're just praying with scripture, or you're just listening to music, or you're just watching a video, or whatever it is. And for us, it was like, man, if we could build something that could showcase for myself, like the diversity of the spiritual tradition within Christianity, allow me to dive deeper into the thing that was resonating with me at any given moment. I think that would be really great. And then doing a really good job of it. I think, we're big fans of anybody trying to help people grow closer to God, but most of the faith tech in the world is not up to par with, either from a design or a tech perspective, with Silicon Valley and with your Netflix or your Spotify or whatever. And so what we really wanted to do was to build something that was a really high quality, both a product and content, that we could look at, any other thing in the world, whether secular or faith-based, and say, hey, this stacks up. This is not, it's so sad. My little sister's a good bit younger than me, just graduated from undergrad. And, I'd show her a faith-based app and she'd just say, no, I'm not going to try that. And it's like, oh, but the content on it is so incredible. Like there's really beautiful prayers or meditations or reflections that could really change your life, which is true. But she was just like, it looks like it was built in 2010. So I'm not going to download it. And for us, it's like, man, faith should be, if you go back 400 years, faith was like, if you look at art or architecture or anything, faith was the pinnacle of it. The most beautiful things were in churches or churches themselves. And that's what faith should be in the digital world too. And so what we wanted to do was build something that was like really, really high quality from a digital perspective and a content perspective and a product perspective. And at the same time, kind of this diverse, personalized experience that, I think folks do well, in like a Spotify, Netflix world, but not really within the faith world. And so we really built it just for us and focused just on building the best thing that we could. And we didn't really, there's still a handful of other apps that are out there, but we don't have like a competitive market. It's not like it's not like somebody's sitting down like they're car insurance shopping and they're comparing quotes. Most people have never heard of the idea of a prayer app before. And I certainly hadn't when I started. And, I had somebody call me actually early on who was working on one of these prayer apps and they said, hey, great idea. We're actually already working on it. So, no need for you to do it. And I was like, okay, I appreciate, yeah, it was a pretty intense conversation, but I was like, I appreciate it. I'm still going to build it, honestly, because I'm building it for me. I'm not building it for some market or something. And I think the market, the percent of people praying in the United States is 80%. What is the percent of people using a prayer app? Like 0.1, So I think the opportunity for us, and that's true still today. We're not competing really with anybody. Nobody downloads Hallow and it's like, oh, I was comparing you with some other option and I chose Hallow. Maybe there's like 1 or 2 people out of every 10,000 that do, but the vast majority of people we're reaching out to and saying, hey, why don't you try and explore this thing as a new tool that you've never thought about before to try to help you grow deeper in your faith life. And so it's almost all new market creation. And so it's very little, the competitive dynamics and the competitive, looking at what other people are doing, it hasn't really been all that useful for us. For us, it's mostly just trying to understand how we best reach out to folks in new and creative ways.
I'm so curious where that person is now. I'm sure they wish they tried harder to dissuade you from growing as
we're big fans. We're big fans of everybody who's trying to help people grow closer to God. Jesus is pretty clear. He's like, you can't compete amongst yourselves. You have to, if somebody's trying to help somebody grow closer to me, we're all on the same team. And I think that's true. Like I have a lot of friends who are building stuff within the faith world and are doing great jobs. And I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity. I mean, if you think about, there are 1.5 billion Catholics, another billion Christians in the world, so 2.5 billion people. What are the products for them? What is the content? What's the brand? What is it? I mean, that's 2.5 billion people. That's crazy. And no one's serving it, which is just, so then it's like, okay, well, Hallow did the prayer app thing. And it's like, yeah, but there's 1,000, you should be able to incorporate prayer into every aspect of your life. You should be able to incorporate your faith into every aspect of your life. And there's 1,000 different ways that you should be able to do that. And unfortunately, they're just not done super well today. And the opportunity for us, I think, to build better products and content and to reach out to people, of the 2.5 billion people, we have 20 million downloads, which is way more than I ever thought possible. But, it's just barely scratching the surface on 2.5 billion.
Did you face any, pushback at the outset? Because I mean, you think about, at least historically, and I think the church is evolving. It seemed like the bifurcation, at least from someone who is more of someone who studies this, like from a historical perspective, is that, you think about Catholicism kind of built around the church as an entity versus, Protestantism, which is, prayer at home. And yet, it seems like there's this kind of new wave of kind of, prayer, and there's this new wave of engaging with God, kind of buoyed by what we have from a technological standpoint as well. Curious, like, did you ever get any pushback on those dimensions, or how you thought about like that dynamic of the church itself as an entity? Like, curious how that came up.
Yeah, honestly, the church, the vision for Hallow from the beginning was, I'm Catholic. I never hide that I'm Catholic. I share that I'm Catholic. Is the beautiful part of my life. Yeah. I'm very proud of it. At the same time, we try to build Hallow, and we have tried to build Hallow in a way that, never goes against my values, of course. We never put something on there that says the rosary is evil, or, Mary is a demon or something. Right. But at the same time, the vast majority of the content, we tried to create and I would argue all the content, but certainly at least the vast majority of the content, just rooted in Scripture, just trying to grow deeper in a relationship with the Lord through His Word and through our lives, but really try to focus on a relationship with Christ. And so, especially over the last few years, we've had a ton of non-Catholic Christians. We have a bunch of people of a bunch of different faith backgrounds who check out the app and are interested in Christian spirituality. Yeah. It's always only going to be about Jesus. We don't, I'm not the right person to build a different religions app, but hopefully Hallow can be a place that's as welcoming as possible to people of any Christian background, certainly, or anybody interested in Christian spirituality. And we have a ton now of, it's almost up to half and half, but it's probably 55-45 Catholic versus non-Catholic Christians that are downloading the app in any given day. But the church, there's a bunch of different philosophies within faith tech or people who are trying to build tech within the faith world. Some people feel very strongly that they are replacing church and they are becoming the digital church, and they don't want people to go to church on Sunday. They want people to go watch their live streams or go, join their app or whatever it is. And this is the new church, and this is how it's going to evolve, and this is the future. I don't. I very strongly disagree with that. Primarily, I can't. I'm a Catholic. If I talk about prayer, the summit of a Catholic's prayer life is the Eucharist. It is the Mass. That is the peak of their prayer life. And my main job is to try to help you pray. And I can't do the thing that is the peak thing. That is that. And I never will try to do that. We might have, help people, gather people together for Mass in different ways or share it in different ways, homilies or sermons or whatever it is. But we can never celebrate the Mass. We can never celebrate the Eucharist. And same with confession. You can't do that digitally. And I do think there's, to the church's credit, I think digital community can be a really powerful thing, but you just can't get away from in-person community. You need it. You need actual human interaction. You need actual human friends. You need people who are close to you when you're going through a tough time, not just people who send you a text, not just FaceTime. You need actual visiting. You need that, love can happen digitally, certainly, but is so powerful when you're gathered together in person. And so for us, it has always been about trying to build something that leads people back to the church. And that was my own experience, which is, I used to go to church every once in a while when my wife would make me, or my mom would make me when I was very little, but I would never go, on my own accord. And then as soon as I built this, I discovered this personal relationship with God, and I started growing in my spirituality. I go to church every day now. I go to confession, every week, every 2 weeks, whatever it is. Adoration, the beautiful traditions of the church. I just became enamored with and have changed my own life radically, way more than the app has. And so our job has just been to share that in as authentic and welcoming a way as we can. And what we've seen is, the dips, our usage spikes on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday's a little bit lower, and then Saturday and Sunday, Saturday's lower and Sunday's the lowest. And so it's this weekly dip that nobody uses the app on Sunday. Maybe some people that listen to another homily if they didn't understand or didn't get the homily that their local pastor was talking about, but everybody's going to church. And that has always been our goal, is to try to be a tool for the church. And I think the church, to her credit, especially the bishops that we've interacted with and priests and leaders around the church have been incredibly supportive, really since the beginning when a lot of people were not. Why do you need an app to pray? The technology's all evil, all this stuff. And I think what the church, what some of the leaders that we saw, that we spoke to, they just got excited about. It's been a really tough, last 30, 40, 50 years as a church, as priests, as bishops. It's been really, obviously for good reason, but heartbreakingly so. But as a bishop, as a priest, it's just been a tough last few decades. And for them to have some sort of light, some sort of hope, something that gets them excited. And for us, it's just what God is doing in these people's lives, young people, old people, everybody across the spectrum. But, especially people that have traditionally the church has not been able to reach. So we had we've had people who have fallen away from their faith for 20 years who started using the app and came back to confession and Mass for the first time in decades. We had an alcoholic we have several alcoholics, but people struggling with dependency who hadn't been able to be sober for decades, who were able to be sober for the first time through a relationship with the Lord. We had a mom who lost her only son, who couldn't get out of bed and couldn't eat, and wrote to us and said, "Hey, I just wanted to let you know this was the first thing that gave me and reminded me that I'm able to have hope even in the darkest time." We had somebody who wrote into us and said, "Hey, I just wanted to let you know that I was confident. I was preparing to end my life. I was in such a depressed, dark place. I had decided to end my life. I had decided to commit suicide. And the last chance I gave God, even though I didn't believe in him, was your rap. And I tried it and he saved my life and I'm standing here alive today because of it. And, so that we just get, and, we got a handful of those notes at the beginning, maybe once every month. And now we just get these notes all the time from all around the world, from people whose lives are being changed by the love of Christ and the love of God and peace and hope and joy. And, you are worthy, you are loved, infinitely loved. And there's just the power that can have in someone's life, especially somebody in a really, really tough time. I think just gives me a lot of hope. And I think to a church, it's just a nice breath of fresh air of hey, God's still working. He's still doing good in this world. And we can have hope still in the future, even though it's been, a really tough last few decades.
I really admire how, one, you have to serve your community. I imagine even with such a strong community, there are so many different opinions. So that's, one stakeholder, if you want to call it that already, that you're balancing. Sure. But even just hearing about how you've talked about building the company and, leading with your values and, using that as a kind of a North Star to make decisions for what's best for the community and the company and as a whole. Sure. I'm curious about, you kind of alluded to your early fundraising conversations, and obviously you have a lot of VC investors now. I'm curious if you ever feel friction from, the multiple stakeholders that might have different interests or are used to working with companies that make decisions in a very different way, are trying to maximize every possible usage or engagement with their community, even if it's not the best thing for their end users, things like that. I'm curious how you balance, I'm sure the many different opinions that you get from these stakeholders, if you will, around the table.
Yeah, honestly, and I got to give credit to God. He's made this one pretty easy on us. But at the beginning, it's not. So the filter is a harsh filter, which the vast majority of people say, no, absolutely not. I don't want to back this thing. I don't want to be associated with this thing. I don't believe in it. I don't back the mission. I don't want my LPs thinking that I'm backing some specific religion. A bunch of different things that are reasons that people say no. The fun part actually about it is, VCs like to say that they're contrarian thinkers, and they try to be. At the same time, they all invest in the same theme all at the same time. It just so happens that that's what happens, I guess, as a contrarian thinker. But prayer is a funny one because there's not a lot of contrarian ideas out there, because the things that are big markets or big opportunities are pretty obvious, and the things that are dramatically underinvested in are pretty obvious, and so they're not really contrarian. But prayer is, and the funny thing is, it's a massive opportunity. It's massively underserved. And it's a contrarian idea really only in a few select zip codes. In the rest of the country, it's obvious. Hey, you go to Kansas City and you say, hey, do you want a meditation app? Or do you want a workout app even? Or do you want a faith app? And they're like, of course, I want something to help me grow closer to Jesus. And you go to Silicon Valley and they're like, no, the Jesus thing is done. We've been done with the Jesus thing for 100 years. And it's just this hilarious dichotomy where it is actually a contrarian idea. And so it does take a really unique investor, a really unique perspective. And actually, one of the things we found is you really have to have a personal experience with it, whether it has to be important to you or your family, somebody in your family really takes it seriously. But I can't convince anybody that faith is an important part of your life. You guys can hear me or someone can hear me who doesn't take their faith seriously. And I say, my faith is the most important thing in my life beyond my kids. And it just kind of, it'll gloss over. You don't really understand what that means, which is this crazy thing. It is a crazy thing that I put this first. And the things I believe in are insane. I believe a little piece of bread turns into God. That I believe these crazy things, and it is the core of who I am. It's the most important part. I will spend whatever I need to make sure from my own personal life that I grow deeper in a relationship with God. And and no one is serving that need. There's very little investment into serving that need. And so, but it really does take that kind of personal experience to be able to appreciate, I think, the opportunity that we have to serve people. But once we've found the folks who do buy into it and to do say, because my pitches are the same to everybody. I'm not hey, I say, hey, God changed my life. I'm trying to share it with people. I think there's a big economic opportunity. I think entrepreneurship can create a tremendous amount of value. It's a startup. It's most likely going to go to nothing. But I think there's a chance that it creates a lot of value in service of our mission, which the church, Christianity strongly believes in, is strongly supportive of entrepreneurship more broadly. As long as it's aligned with Christian values of service, you can't be ripping people off or whatever, but as long as it's aligned with Christian values, it is an opportunity to serve people if you take it at that value, it is an opportunity to lift people out of poverty. It's an opportunity for a lot of things. And so, the church really does believe in entrepreneurship. And I do. Like, if you put it second, if you put economics second, and you put your mission first, which Hallow is a public benefit corporation, which we can get into with fiduciary responsibility stuff, but it allows us to put the mission in every way first and the economic piece second. Right. And I think, you can then get, but it's scripture. If you seek first the kingdom of God, all the other things will be given unto you. But if you seek first the things of this world, you won't get the kingdom of God. You'll get nothing. You'll get screwed. And so for us, it's really about trying to do what God is asking and seek first the mission of Hallow, which is to try to help people grow in a relationship with God and love and hope and peace. And the other thing is, like, we chose our business model very specifically. We made a lot of decisions at the beginning really specifically around this, which is, you could have done ads, you could have done something where I ping you for money every once in a while, you could have done something where you're selling data, which seems wildly inappropriate in the faith world. You could have done something where, or you could have, you buy each piece of content or whatever, or you could have a subscription. And for us, the thing about a subscription, we have a free version, so you can use the free version. There's thousands of sessions available for free. We give away subscriptions to people who can't afford it. But assuming you can afford it, the subscription version works incredibly well in alignment with our mission. Our mission is to help people pray. What does that mean if we were to try to measure it? It means we want to help as many people as we can, and we want to help them in as deep a way as possible. Help the people who are already reaching in as deep a way as possible. So we want to reach out to new people, which is growth. We measure that by growth. How many new people are we reaching out to? And then retention is the only real way you can measure how much you're adding value to somebody. You can ask surveys, but those are always bull. Retention, whether they're using it every day, is the only real indicator of whether you're adding value to their life. Now, some people, learn how to pray and get off it, which is great, but it's the most reliable indicator. So then you've got growth and retention as the two things that indicate to you that you're succeeding in your mission, that you're doing your mission. The only two things from a subscription business that matter are growth and retention. We don't care if you use it 20 times a day. We don't care if we have your eyeballs for 5 hours a day, as long as you retain, as long as you build a healthy habit over time, which is what we're trying to do. And we want to keep you forever. We don't care about running ads or getting eyeballs or any of that stuff. So our optimization is specifically for each individual subscriber, and just from an economic perspective. And then we have all the free users from a mission perspective, which is a clear line you have to draw, but we draw that very clearly whenever we have any investor conversation. Hey, it's really important for us to always have free content. But the goal is then just helping people to start a habit of prayer and helping them to build a habit of prayer. That's the value of the app. And so for us, I don't know, I guess, sorry, this is a long question, but the long answer, but the last thing that I say is, like, if you told me 1,000 people would be using this thing, if you told me 10,000 people would be using this thing, if you told me 100,000 people would be using this thing, 1,000 people would be a lot. Like, I would be like, wow, that's crazy. 1,000 people using this thing. Like, I look outside right now and I see 1,000 people praying with this app. That is a ton of people. You tell me 10,000, I'm like, oh, wow, that is also a lot of people. 100,000, a million, 10 million, 100 million. Those are all a lot of people. And every time we've set a goal that's a number, it doesn't give you any fulfillment. It doesn't, like, nothing changes after you hit the number. There's, it's maybe fun, it's maybe exciting, it's maybe, something to celebrate, but it's not fulfilling. It's not the core of what it is. For us, the core of what it is this woman who reached out to us and said, hey, I don't think I'd be standing here physically alive. A 17-year-old, I don't think I'd be standing here physically alive if it wasn't for this app at 18. And that is like, I would work for the next 50 years for that one story. Listen, I don't care if there's 1 billion people praying or 100 million people praying. If I work for the next 50 years, I lose everything. Everything goes up in smoke. Everybody hates me. The whole thing's destroyed. But one more of those stories happens. Like, of course, I'd do that 100 times over. Why wouldn't you? Any normal person, any sane human would. Like, you get to be a part of God saving someone's life. It's just incredible. Like, so I don't know. For us, yeah, I don't get excited about numbers, out of valuation or any of that stuff. It's not, you will never find fulfillment. I will never find fulfillment in any of that stuff. And if anything, it's not going to help me get to heaven, which is what I care most about. It's probably going to do the opposite. And the thing that I really care about is what God is doing in people's lives through this thing. And so it's really always been really easy for me to put the mission first, just because of how dramatic it is. And how poignant and how little the other things are, the numbers or any of that stuff. So I don't know. We haven't really actually, and most of our supporters, anybody who's on board has already heard that story 1,000 times, has already heard me say that. And so they know it. And so, if there's an argument for, hey, you can change pricing to be able to reach out to more people, or you can, there's different arguments all in service of the mission. And you do need money to do the mission. Like, you need to be able to reach out to people. Ads help. We need to produce the content. We need to pay the people on the app what they're worth. And we need to create like really high quality stuff. And so the economics can be and need to be really solid in order to support the actual mission. But if you put it first, it's just you end up nowhere. So
do you say this to, it sounds like you do, to investors, and you mentioned your board and everything, like you're like, I don't care about numbers. Maybe you don't lead with that, but it comes up in conversation. It's very clear that you're very mission oriented first, which I admire. It's not going to people that sometimes. Yeah.
I care about numbers. My co-founder will correct me, Eric, because one of my co-founders. I care about numbers in as such they represent humans.
Yeah.
And they represent individuals. So it is really cool to me. 10,000 people download the app yesterday. It's like, well, that's awesome because, there's probably a good chunk of those folks who are really tough times. It's awesome to get to pray with anybody, whether you're going through a really tough time or not. I've taken my faith seriously for 5 years. I like praying with me. I'd like having an app that helps me. It's awesome to get to pray with bishops and monks and pastors and everybody. But the really cool part for us, the thing that like really sticks out, and I think the core of our mission is this reaching out to folks who are in tough times and had fallen away, because that's what I had. That's why we started the app, and that's why it exists at all. For us, the really cool, exciting product, the really cool, exciting part is getting to build a product that is high quality enough and intuitive enough and compelling enough to really reach out to everybody, both people who take their faith seriously and folks who have fallen away. But yeah, again, the filter is really hard. So a lot of people are not a fan of me saying that. At the same time, I do think, and I can point to, I think this can create tremendous economic value. If you do it that way, if you go first with the mission and you worry about the economics as a supportive factor of that mission, I think you can create tremendous economic value. There's 2.5 billion Christians in the world. That's a really big subscriber business if you get a small portion of them to subscribe. And even if you have a primarily free product. And so I think people are pretty supportive of that. And the startup world is that, which is like, how can you, I want to accept that there's a 95% chance of failure, knowing that there's a 5% chance that I build something big, primarily for me from a mission perspective. But I think along with that goes the economics of it. I did have I was given a talk on a panel on behalf of one of our earliest investors. And I was talking about, my biggest learning through this whole Hallow thing has just been surrender, which has just been like letting God lead and stopping, usually maybe startup advice is the opposite, which is like, nose to the grindstone, like really work hard, which is important to work hard. It's important to think strategically and all that stuff. But for me, the biggest wins have been when I get out of my own way and just let God do what he wants to do. And, I can point to like 50 different stories where it's like very tactically, that's what's happening, which if you'd told me that before I believed, I would have said you were crazy. Like God doesn't actually do that. He doesn't actually like change things, but he does. And he is the reason for every one of Hallow's like successes. Clearly, he waits till I give up. And then he says, okay, you've given up. Now I'm going to do it for you. And makes it, some random reach out or some random thing pops back up or whatever it is. And, our investor got up after and he was like, well, it's a pretty interesting experience hearing your founder CEO say the core is to give up, but to surrender is his main learning. But, I guess it's working for him. So,
working for you.
But it's it's certainly maybe not the norm, but I don't know. It's fun. And it's this thing is already so much bigger than I ever possibly imagined it could be. And so we're just playing with house money. It's just like, yeah, okay, let's try to change the world. That could be fun. Let's try to reach out to people who are in really tough times. God's going to do what he wants to do, but maybe he can let us be a part of that. And yeah, I don't know. It's fun for us to get to work on. And it allows us to take, I think what people, especially when you get to like a stage like we are, I think, what a lot of investors actually are afraid of is like, okay, you've built something, really significant, from a mission perspective, from an economic perspective, it didn't exist and now it exists, and your now focus is you don't want to screw it up. And so their push is like, no, like how do you 10x, not how do you grow 20%? How do you double, not 20% growth? And for me, like that's awesome. So that's the only push I ever get, which is like think bigger, which is awesome because that is what I want to be pushed on, because that's the mission. Like there's a bunch of companies out there, there's a bunch of organizations, there's a bunch of resources that serve the million people that already go to church every day, that already go to church all the time, that take their faith super seriously. That's great. That's awesome. There's nothing, good good or worse or whatever about what we're trying to do. But what we are trying to do, I think, is unique in the sense that we're not trying to do that. We're trying to, yes, serve those people, which is great and an honor, but to really reach out to the people who are hardest to reach. And to do that, you have to 2x, you have to 3x, you have to 4x. You can't grow 20% year over year. You have to build these really big things that are really big, scary swings that are not natural when you're sitting back and you're like, whoa, there's a whole organization that exists that didn't exist before. I better not screw it up. And for me, it's like, well, I don't have to worry about not screwing it up because it's God's. If he wants to screw it up, he can screw it up. If he doesn't want to screw it up, he won't screw it up. But for me, I think what he's asking us to do is take these really big swings, which from a VC perspective actually aligns really well with the core of, how their model works.
It's really endearing to like hear you talk about how excited you are about like 1,000 people, and I can tell you're very genuine about that. And now realizing, I think like the latest stat I saw is like you guys have like 18 million downloads or something, which is obviously the scale that is massive. I'm actually just curious, like at what point in your journey did you go from, I'm building this for myself to being like, wow, this is really working? Like that, they talk about consumer, how there's an inflection point or that hockey stick growth. I'm curious if there's a moment or a time period that really stands out to you as like, being that moment for you.
There is. I love this question. But it's not the norm. The norm is, hey, you got to find product market fit. So your retention curves have to flatline. You have to find good unit economics and find a distribution channel that's working, and you scale it, and it scales. And all those are important. It's really important to have product market fit. If you don't have product market fit, that just means you're not building a good product that people are churning, and you're not providing value to a group of people consistently over time. And retention rates for us are you helping people really build a healthy habit of prayer, or is it just a fad that they're doing for a couple weeks and dropping off? And so all those things are super important. But in the early days, I don't know, the numbers are really, you have a really early app. It's, you only got like 100 people, a couple hundred people. It's like, what does a flat retention curve look like? Does it flatten at 12 weeks? Does it flatten at 20 weeks? Whatever. So we launched in 2018, December of 2018, which the season of the month of December is the season of Advent in the church, which is the season leading up to Christmas. And we did a little challenge for Advent where, which it's one of our biggest things we do every year, an Advent challenge and a Lent challenge, which is the season leading up to Easter. But we did this little Advent challenge, and we maybe had, 80 people using the app, maybe like 20 sessions available on the app. We now have, I think, 100,000 different audio files on the app. But I got a note like 4 days after we launched the app, which so my cousin, he had just gotten married. His wife had just gotten pregnant with their first kid. He had pain in his chest. He went to the doctor. They said he was fine, went home, died in his sleep. And like his mom, her only son, my aunt, was heartbroken, like destroyed. She couldn't, she wasn't eating, she wasn't getting out of bed. And like all of us were like, what could we possibly do for this woman? Like, cook her a meal or something? Like, how could you speak to a pain that deep? And nobody really could do anything. It's, you lose your only son, I don't know, at 40. Like, how do you do that? And she sent us this note like 4 days after we launched. And I had no idea she had downloaded the app. It was like, there's 80 people using this. Somehow she got a hold of it from my mom or something. And she said, Alex, I just wanted to let you know. I've memorized this email obviously since, but Alex, I just wanted to let you know that Christmas is always a really stressful time for me. I have to figure out how to visit all my grandkids, how to get gifts for everybody, travel, all that stuff. It's a really stressful, anxious time for me. There's a lot going on. And I honestly didn't think I'd be able to make it through this Christmas season. It is the first Christmas season without my son. I was facing it with this like overwhelming sense of dread. I can't put it into words. Like, how could I go through Christmas without my son? And she said, I just want to let you know that these little meditations on this app have reminded me that I'm able to have hope and peace again in my life, even in the darkest moment, of which I clearly am. And have allowed me to get out of bed, and allowed me to eat, and allowed me to carry on with my life. And I was just like, I broke down on the floor, tears, still makes me cry to this day thinking about it. And this woman's like, oh man, I love this woman. And I remember I went and we got like 80 users. I have no idea. And the growth was just us texting people or whatever. I went and I had a drink with Eric, one of the two other co-founders. And I was like, dude, what's crazy is if we blow everything, like we had money saved from previous jobs, and if we spend everything we have, which we had by that point, gone into debt, whatever, and we go into bankruptcy, or everyone hates us, and this whole thing, it gets big and it blows up and it all goes terribly and our names are ruined and whatever, and it's, our careers are done, and if the worst possible thing happens, or if nothing ever happens, if nobody ever uses this thing, it was worth it for that one note. For sure, it was worth it. I would work for the next 50 years for that one note. If you told me, hey, Alex, you can help your aunt a little bit, just a little bit, and we didn't really do it, God did it, but you can be a little part of God helping your aunt. Would you work for the next 50 years, blow everything, lose everything for it? I'd say yes, of course I would. And we were like, I don't know if this thing's going to work. I don't know if we're going to find a distribution channel. I don't know if we're going to find the right retention rates or whatever, but I think God can do something really cool with this. And we should probably build it. We should probably really focus on building it. And he has, he just does these crazy cool things with it, these crazy stories, just like my aunt, even more heartbreakingly terrible, people in real pain that he's able to reach out to. And so for us, it was when I think about the moment that I knew, I don't know if it's going to work. I don't know what work means, but it's still it's a startup, so it still all could go to nothing. But that was the moment I knew, God probably wants us to do this thing. And, he'll do what he wants with it, but he probably wants us to really focus on it.
Yeah, I feel like few B2B SaaS founders have stories as touching.
Yeah, I was about to say, someone's cutting onions over here on my end, so I appreciate you sharing.
It's a beautiful, it's God's story. I just get to share it. I just get to brag on behalf of him. But consumer is really hard. It's churn rates are hard. Everybody has an opinion on consumer. Everybody gets mad at you with consumer, but it is really cool. It's really cool to watch what God does in people's lives. For us, especially, obviously in the faith world for consumer, but it's really cool to get to actually interact with people, not with companies or organizations, which we have a bunch of partnerships with churches and schools and universities and all that stuff. But there's, our focus is really always and has always really been on the people.
Well, I know we don't have a ton of time left, so there are a couple of things I wanted to ask you about, but one for sure that I need to touch on is just your Super Bowl commercial earlier this year with Mark Wahlberg. Super cool. And I thought actually we'll try to link it in some show notes or something, but I saw your post recently too about why you guys use celebrities. Also, you talked about high quality content earlier and how it's a big part of your strategy to building awareness, et cetera. But I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit about that backstory. Was it a controversial decision to do? Was it something that you felt very confident in? How did you meet Mark? I would love to hear kind of the backstory of forming that, which I imagine is, a huge inflection point for the company.
Yeah, Mark's been great. He's been phenomenal, good to work with. We've worked with him for a few years now. He did a movie called Father Stu, which he really felt like God was calling him in this stage in his career to dedicate, to use his platform to share about what God has done in his life and to give thanks to God. And so he funded and produced this Father Stu thing himself, which was this really beautiful faith-based movie. And we helped work with him a bit on it and promote it and partner with some content on the app for it. And we got really into, we really loved working together and decided to, from both sides, he's phenomenal. So we were lucky to get to work with him for, dive deeper into a much longer term partnership. So we've been working with him for several years. The Super Bowl commercial was a crazy one. Never in a million years would I have made that decision to do a Super Bowl. But once every 12 years, the Super Bowl falls on the Sunday immediately before Ash Wednesday. Both of those are kind of random dates. The church's calendar doesn't line up with, obviously, the football calendar, and the football calendar changes. And so once every 12 years, roughly, the Sunday, Super Bowl Sunday is the Sunday immediately before Ash Wednesday. So it never really would make sense for us. It never makes sense from a pure acquisition perspective. Cool. But for us, we were like, man, well, if there's one chance, and it was just a regional ad, so it was much cheaper than a national Super Bowl ad and all this stuff. But we were like, well, if there's one time that we might take a swing like this, which is a huge swing for any startup, it would be now, because on the context is, the spike for us on Ash Wednesday, which is the kickoff of Lent. To call it a spike is a dramatic understatement. It's our biggest launch of the year. It's a huge new piece of content. We have all the best people on it, and it's really powerful, really beautiful. And it's this really unique time of year where people are really dedicated. It's after New Year's resolutions, but you're kind of like, okay, I want to recommit to growing deeper in my faith life. And leading up to Easter. And so it's like 100x our normal day. So you'll have 1,000 people Well, actually, so you'll have like 10,000 people download the app. These are rough numbers, but you'll have like 10,000 people download the app on a given day, maybe 5 to 10,000 or something. And on the Super Bowl, it was this huge spike. It was like 100,000. But then on Ash Wednesday, it was 500,000. So it was like this massive spike. And for us, the Super Bowl isn't really a great like call to action. It's a brand marketing campaign mostly. It's not like a Facebook thing where you're tapping on something and clicking it or whatever. Maybe Coinbase with their QR code thing. But for us, it's like, well, this is a really unique time to do the brand thing where you can say, hey, we're doing this thing. It's starting in 2 days. When you hear about it in 2 days, try it. And it was more of like a, hey, get aware of Hallow, get aware of Mark and the app and what we're doing for Lent. And, you know, the commercial itself was really beautifully done. The team did a really great job. The last piece for us was like, well, are we going to be able to have creative that's worthy of this? Like, do we, you know, because you don't just want to do a regular ad or whatever. It's like, well, could you have a really cool idea? And so I struggled with that for a while because we were like, well, maybe the timing is just right enough, just crazy enough that we might do it. But we couldn't really figure out what we'd do. Like, do you do a funny commercial? Do you do whatever? And we were like, well, you know what? We're a prayer app. And why don't we just pray? And even if nobody downloads it, again, from a mission perspective, even if nobody downloads the app as a cause of it, maybe somebody is watching that commercial somewhere, hasn't prayed in 20 years, hasn't prayed in 5 years, has never tried to pray, and is like, whoa, and tries to pray, or at least enters in or prays with us for like half a second. Like that would be worth it. Not from an economic perspective, certainly, but from a mission perspective, yeah. And it ended up, like I said before, if you seek first the mission, but it ended up being worth it economically, which is this crazy bet. Probably had a 20% chance of working out, but because of how perfect the timing was for the Ash Wednesday launch, which was kind of the Lent launch. So a crazy story for us, but God ended up leading us through it all right. I think we did the Super Bowl commercial. I think we did that from deciding to do it to executing it and sending it over like in 2 months, maybe 8 weeks, which is like, I think, I mean, most Super Bowl commercials are a year. So it takes 12 months to whatever. So it was a crazy process, but no, I mean, there's a lot of things that get us really excited from a startup perspective. Prayer and faith is supposed to be done together. So you're supposed to do it with your church and with your family and with your friends. And so we already have a bunch of different ways that we journey together through content on the app, but continuing to build that, which kind of creates this glue and these really powerful experiences for like, you know, if my kid's sick or something and I need somebody to pray for him, instead of me sending out an email, I can, you know, have a campaign on Hallow where we all get together and pray, even if you don't know how to pray, that we all pray together for the kid. And working with churches to help better lead people to churches and build up church communities and help church communities to pray together. And then international is probably the other massive piece, other than just continuing to do the stuff that we're doing. But, you know, the vast majority of Christians in the world, and especially Catholics, live outside the United States. And so for us to be able to really serve the church, I think it's an exciting thing for us to try to reach out to people in Europe and Latin America and, Asia and Philippines and all these different places, which is really cool. We're the number one. We hit the number one chart in the U.S. for Lent, but also in Brazil, and have started really taking off in Europe and Mexico and a handful of these places. And so we have a good chunk of folks in India too. So being able to pray with our brothers and sisters around the world is a pretty exciting one too. But those are probably the two big things we're focused on.
Cool. Very cool. I guess in this last little bit, where we have a rapid fire session.
Let's do it.
If you don't mind answering in, one sentence or less, we'd appreciate it. So first, the founder you look up to most.
Jesus.
Love it. Book that most changed your life. Bible can be one answer, but we'll do another answer too.
Okay, maybe I'll do two answers, which is a secular answer and my Jesus answer. So Jesus is the founder. I like Jobs. Jobs, I think, he's a crazy guy, but I think he's built the best products in the world. Book, He Leadeth Me, from a spiritual perspective, and/or St. Teresa of Avila's work. I can't really pick which one of her books I like the best, but probably the Interior Castle. And then I like the hard thing about hard things. I think that's one of the few of the like 50 business books I read. I think that's one of the few that's really actually pretty helpful. And then the 4 Steps to Epiphany in the really early days of startup stuff was really helpful with just talking to users and understanding what they need and how best to serve them.
Well, what job would you want if you couldn't be a founder?
A monk. I really would love to be a monk, which makes sense, given the role. I like to golf. I think actually a professional golfer would be a really hard job because you travel all the time. But it would be fun.
Favorite account? It could be a newsletter, Twitter account. IG meme account, anything that you follow?
I mean, Steph's obviously.
Yeah, Steph has a pretty good Twitter.
Hey, there we go.
First entrepreneurial endeavor.
It was certainly this. I'm not one of those guys who grew up knowing that he wanted to be an entrepreneur or any of that stuff. I always thought it was interesting. I always thought it was like a fascinating journey, but I wasn't like doing paper routes or starting businesses.
Last question, a mega trend that you're most excited about can be related to kind of what you're up to now or something beyond it as well.
I think there's a lot of exciting stuff. I mean, like if you look at broader media, if you look at some of the music that takes off, if you look at whatever over the last 20 years, maybe 10, 20 years, I think the last 10 years, especially, like you see Father Mike's Bible in a Year taking off, you see The Chosen taking off, I think there's a lot of really cool stuff happening within people's spiritual lives that is, and I think it's sadly because the world, like we're in a really tough place. Politics is really tough, very divisive, filled with hate. But also the world, I think, like people are addicted to technology, driving tremendous amounts of anxiety. You've got people addicted to opioids and substances in ways that we've never seen. You've got heartbreaking things happening around the world with both of those. And so I think I think the world is in a really tough place. But, the good part about that is that's where God reaches out to us, is in those tough places. And he does these like really incredible things. And so despite the fact that the world is in a really tough place, which I think it is, I get really hopeful for what God can do in the world and how he can bring love and peace even through kind of trials and tribulations.
Awesome, Alex. This was incredible. Really, really appreciate the time. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It was a blessing.
Thanks everyone for listening. You can find us at somethingnewpod.com. You can follow Steph at StephMui, MUI on Twitter. You can follow myself, Leeor, at LMushin on Twitter. Catch us again next time.
Cool. I got it well.